Everybody, welcome back to Game Esoterica, and I got a viewer request video this week. A lot of you guys asked for an emulation guide to the FM Towns and FM Towns Marty. The video that I did in December absolutely blew up and did outstanding stats, so I'm going to trust you guys when you say you wanted this emulation tutorial, because you don't have to be like me and spend all this money to play these awesome and very rare games. We can emulate them, although I will say, as far as setting emulators up is concerned, it is one of the more difficult things to do. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a step-by-step guide to start playing FM Towns on your Windows PC today. But I want you to be aware of something at the start. You have to watch the entire video. Don't skip around. Don't try to do this midway through. There's a lot of very weird steps and a lot of very weird quirks that if you don't listen fully, it's not going to work for you. So if you want to emulate FM Towns, just follow along with me, please, and don't try to skip ahead. You'll see here right in the UNZ emulator, I'll leave a link to this in the description below, we have a lot of different options. A lot of these don't really have much bearing on what we're trying to do whatsoever, but you will see we have a drive 0 and a drive 1. 0 and 1 are just basically designations for 1 and 2, but computers start at 0. You'll see we have some options for window size as well. You can articulate those however you want. We even have clock speeds. Generally I just leave that at normal. We have different frame rate options. These are kind of the standard emulation options right here, because don't forget FM Towns came in multiple different flavors: Towns, Marty, FM Towns 2, all the way up to having Pentium CPUs in the systems. We're dealing with Towns, Marty, and 2 here, so we can play the games that are most famous for the FM Towns. You have some tools as well, screenshots, debugs, things like that. Not going to be super important. What is important is in the properties menu right here. We have a machine ID and we can decide whatever towns we want this to be. But how do you make it a towns? Well, we need to deal with BIOS files too, and you'll see there's an FM Towns ROM zip in this preparation folder I have made. And we have to decide what system we are targeting, because we have to put the BIOS files into the main emulation folder right near the executable. So what I recommend is for each system you're trying to emulate for the Towns series of hardware to have a separate installation of the emulator in and of itself, because some of the BIOS names are the same, and if you start copying them all over, you're going to overwrite something and have a bad time. If we're trying to emulate the FM Towns 2 HR, we have 2 files right there. If we're targeting something like the Marty, we want to have this emulate the console-based system. If we unzip the second zip, FM Towns Marty ROM, these would be all the files that we copy over into the main folder of the emulator that we are using. And that's why I can't stress enough, I highly recommend an installation per system. It just works a lot better and it becomes a lot easier, and honestly, this is like 10 megabytes, so if you have 7 different folders with 7 different emulators targeting 7 different FM Towns computers, it's really not going to be that big of a deal whatsoever. We need to talk about the games for a second though, because this emulator needs to have discs in your system. That is how it works. If you download a game, you're going to see a Q file, and if we use daemon tools, we can mount a virtual disk to our Windows system. I'll leave a link to daemon tools down below. Technically, if you have a CD-ROM drive, you can mount the disk in there, and you can target that actual disk to the emulator, but honestly, you're watching an emulation tutorial, you probably don't have that. But my favorite part is check the disc. The Splatterhouse has custom illustrations you'll never see anywhere else. But let's get back over to the properties menu in the emulator in and of itself. This is where we're going to be changing all of the different options. Available memory, 8 megabytes, will pretty much cover every single FM Towns game you want. And I leave the CPU clock speed at 16 megahertz. You can adjust this. Weird things may happen, weird things may not happen, and you can switch from a 386DX to a 486DX if you so choose. And if you're not sure what that means, it's just a set of instructions for Intel-based processors from way back in the day. As far as video emulation is concerned, I leave everything as is and unchecked, except you do see enable special drawing for Chase HQ. If you play that one game, it does use a different graphical mode and you will get glitches unless you check that box. We have resolution options for normal mode, high resolution mode, and full color mode, and you'll see some of those resolution toggles in actual games itself. But we can set the full screen resolution and color depth. You're going to want to match whatever your monitor is using. I can't tell you what to use, I can just tell you that you need to check the resolution of your displays. Now, super important, sound, you need to make sure output device is primary sound driver. If anything else is selected, you're going to be playing these games without audio whatsoever. So make sure that in fact is selected, because if it is not highlighted, then it is not going to have any audio whatsoever, and that's half a game, and we don't want that. You have audio sample rates as well. I'll leave it at 44.1, seems to work the best for me, and you can enable different MIDI devices if you want. Now, MIDI was not a huge thing on the FM Towns, not like the Sharp X68000, but if you do find a game and you want to play with MIDI, you do have some MIDI options here as well, depending on what you want to do. Keyboard, you can change the key configuration of your keyboard to match something different, but in general the FM Towns keyboard and the Windows keyboard are very similar. So there really isn't any instance that I have ever come across that you need to start changing key code allocations, but it is there in case you want to take a look and you run into something that you need to deal with. Just be aware that maybe you don't want to be mucking around with there, because it's not that big of a deal. System keys, however, is very important because it's going to show the function of the hardware to your keyboard. This is all going to be done via keyboard, so you'll see joystick left and right is going to be keyboard left and right. You'll see your select and run buttons, A button and B buttons. Those are going to be the ones that are the most important for you. You can transpose these over to a controller if you have a keyboard to controller software running in between this, but as far as the emulator is concerned, it is based on the keyboard. So if you want to know what keys you're using, go to System Keys. Input is key emulation. This is done by default. Don't touch this menu whatsoever. If you do, you're probably going to break something and you're going to have a very bad time. But now we're getting into the most important menu, how to run the games. This is CD-ROM 1. This is where we're going to select that virtual drive that we just designated. You just check to see what letter it is that you need, and you select that letter and hit OK. But here's the thing, it's not going to just run. It's a very weird thing. You need to select the letter, you need to close the emulator, and you need to relaunch it, and then suddenly it will boot. You have to basically close this emulator and relaunch it after you change anything. Changes do not adhere in the program whatsoever until you close. That saves them. So if you're switching drive letters and you don't close the program, you're not going to get another game. In most games, you're going to see this display mode. You can do different resolutions, whatever looks good to your eye. But if you follow along, we're going to be playing Splatterhouse, the best port of this game outside owning an original arcade board, on your PC, and you're going to have to spend a hell of a lot less than I did to do it. And it runs perfectly compared to real hardware. Now let's change a game really quickly. You'll see here, if we go up to Property, we go to CD-ROM and we select that new drive image and hit OK, nothing's going to happen. If we reset the system, nothing's going to happen. You're going to see that counter at the bottom right looking for a disk. Close it, launch it again, and you're going to get this little clock at the bottom corner. It is now executing the game. I don't know why you have to do it that way, but if you don't do it that way, you're not going to be playing games like Afterburner 3. It's a very big quirk of the emulator, but now that you know about it, you won't be confused. And I know this because it tripped me up the first time I emulated FM Towns years ago, and there's really not much documentation on how to get any of this done whatsoever, and that's why, because you guys loved the first video so much and asked for this guide, I made it. It wasn't an easy video to make, and I'm not sure if it's going to do well, so let's hope. If you like it, leave me that comment and a thumbs up down below. But then you can be playing stuff like Afterburner 3 via FM Towns emulation. If you bought the hardware to play this game with the game, you'd be at like $1,000 plus. Now just be aware that sometimes with daemon tools you have to eject the disk, and if you've made too many virtual disk images, it's going to tell you you're using all available virtual devices. This is not a big deal whatsoever. Do not pay to get the unlimited version. Just go ahead and open up Daemon Tools, Light, and skip that at the bottom. You'll see drives that you have virtually mounted that are empty. Just hit X until they're all gone, and now we have 4 more virtual drives that we can mount. Double click the Q file and you're going to see it pop up right there again. Just go ahead and set your drive designation and reset the emulator by quitting and relaunching it, and you're playing another game. It is that easy once you get it up and running. Getting this emulator running is a big pain in the butt. You need to deal with the ROM files, you need to have multiple installations of the emulator set up, and you need to understand that you need to quit the application and relaunch it for any major things to adhere. Now, one note though about certain games. Some games have a system disk. If we go up to drive 0, which is always where we'll put the system disk, drive 1 will always be the CD if we have a system disk, and we navigate over to our FM Towns games, you're going to see a game like Emerald Dragon. It's going to say FD. That means there's a floppy disk with it. Sometimes you need to download these separately, but the system disk is right there. Interestingly, you can reset once you put this in. It works for floppies, but not for CDs. And now, even though the game wouldn't launch when we had the CD-ROM drive designation correct, now that we've mounted that system disk in the floppy drive virtual image, it will run the game. And if you speak Japanese, it's probably a really fun game. If you don't, you can just take a look at it. Most games on FM Towns and FM Towns Marty do not require system disks. I would say less than 5% have them. But if you do download an FM Towns game and it has an FD zip along with it, that means it has a system disk. And taking a look at my original Emerald Dragon system disk here, it's just something that the Towns does. And like I said, it's very rare you're going to find a game that requires it. But if it does, now you know how to do it. And now you know how to emulate the FM Towns, the FM Towns 2, and the FM Towns Marty. You don't need to spend multiple thousands of dollars like I did, in some instances buzzed while on eBay, to play these games at home today. If you follow this guide, you too will be playing FM Towns. And if you run into any issues whatsoever, if you have any questions, leave me a comment down below. I will help you as much as I can, or you can join my Discord in the description, and I will help you there as well. But start playing FM Towns. It's awesome. The first video did spectacularly. So many of you guys asked me for this emulation guide, so I hope it does great. Hit like and subscribe below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.